Today we're going to learn about Section 1.4, Complex Numbers, Day 1. And the learning goal is for you to be able to add, subtract, multiply, and divide complex numbers. So let's first look at what a complex number is. If you remember, you can never square a negative number. So if you get something like this, and you try to square root both sides, you know that this will not be a real number. So what we do is we use the imaginary unit I to represent the square root of -1. So anytime you have a negative under your square root, you always use I to help you simplify it, which means that I squared always equals -1. So you want to remember that. And so when you're simplifying, for example, if you had the square root -25, that would be the square root of -1 times the square root of 25, which will give you I times 5, which is 5I. Okay, so to help us simplify the square root of -1, we use I. And if you have something like 5I squared, or let's put the square on the outside, that would be 25I squared, but I squared equals -1, so that answer would be -25. Okay? Now, a complex number is in the form of A plus BI. And this is standard form where the real number comes first. So the real number is A. That's the real number. And the imaginary, or the real part, I should say the real part, and then this is the imaginary part. So a complex number is made up of a real part and an imaginary part. Now, if you just have I by itself, then that's called a pure imaginary number. So what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide complex numbers. Now we're going to look at adding and subtracting complex numbers. So what you have to do is remember to add or subtract the real number part and add or subtract the imaginary part. Okay, so let's look at 1A. We have 5 plus 7, which is the real part, which is 12. And then we have -11I plus 4I is -7I. And that's your answer. You always want to make sure your real number is first. And then -5 minus -11. So that'll give us 6. And then positive I minus -6I is positive 7I. So adding and subtracting, you're just combining like terms. Okay, multiplying. You can multiply two ways, distributing or foiling. So I'm going to do one example of both. But just remember that when you multiply, you are going to get an I squared. Just remember that I squared is always equal to -1. So anytime you see that, you want to change it to a -1. Okay, so let's do a distributing. Just distribute to both, and you'll get 12I minus 20I squared. And there's that I squared, so don't forget to change it. So you have 12I minus 20 times negative 1. So that'll make that positive 20. So when you write your answer, you write the real number first. And there you go. And then foiling, I'll get negative 14 minus 35I plus 6I minus 15I squared. So I'll get negative 14. This becomes negative 41I minus 15 times negative 1. So I'll have negative 14 minus 41I plus 15. Combining like terms, I'm going to end up with 1 minus 41I. And there's your answer. So that's multiplying. Just remember, I squared equals negative 1. Okay, with dividing, what we're going to do is multiply by the conjugate. And the conjugate, you're going to multiply the conjugate of the denominator, which will be 2 plus 5i. Do not change the real number. You change the imaginary part. And you have to do the top and bottom. And what you're going to do is you're going to FOIL them. So dividing does take a little bit more time. So you have 14 plus 35i plus 8i plus 20i squared all over. On the bottom, you're just going to get 4 plus 10i minus 10i minus 25i squared. These terms in the middle shall always cancel in the bottom. So then on the top, we'll have 14 plus 43i plus 20 times negative 1. And on the bottom, we'll just have 4 minus 25 times negative 1. And then simplifying, we're going to have 14 minus 20, which is negative 6. And on the bottom, we'll have 4 plus 25, which would be 29. So when you write your answer, it's very important that you write in standard form. Standard form looks like this. The real part and the imaginary part. And if you could reduce it, you can. If not, you leave it alone. And that's it.